Leia Healthcare, looking after you always. Proud sponsors of Real Health with Karl Henry.
Hello and welcome to Real Health with me, Karl Henry, in association with Leia Healthcare. Folks, in recent weeks, we've had some really good food experts on with Neven Maguire and the Happy Pears and lots more. Food, eating and your diet is one of the best ways to stay healthy and stay in control while so much is going on in the world outside of your control. And my guest for this week's show is a firm believer in food and the importance of it for physical and mental well-being. He's a friend of the show and he's the first ever guest we've had on 3 times, but we're delighted to have him back. He's absolutely amazing, passionate for what he does, and he is an all-round brilliant guy to have on. Davey, welcome back to Real Health. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm a little bit flattered. Third time. I really hope we can come up with some new content.
Oh, I'm sure that won't be a problem. First of all, I've asked every guest this because I think it's really interesting. How's life and how's the last 12 months been?
I'm hearing the same thing quite a bit from people in the industry. It was exciting. It was innovative. And I suppose we were in a new space of reflection in the first part of the year, and that is actually nearly a year ago now, at last March, when we went into that lockdown. And I was very excited by it all. I launched a new business, and it gave me a good opportunity to see where things are at, and look at also my own areas of what I wanted to pursue. So I found that really great. I obviously it's got tougher and tougher. I mean, the second lockdown and third wave and stuff like that. But having said all of that around the challenges of it, I'm in a really good headspace, and I genuinely feel, I know this sounds strange, but I feel grateful that I have learned an awful lot about myself and about how to maybe help others a little bit more in this last year.
I have to ask, what have you learned about yourself? I know, and I agree with you. Right? I've learned loads about myself over the course of the last 12 months, without a doubt. And it's really forced me to reflect upon what's important and all of that. What have you learned?
I've learned that even though I'm very fortunate to be around high performers and athletes that I work with, and incredible coaches and strength and conditioning specialists and physios, I have access to this incredible support network. I've realized that even with all of that I'm still not a robot, and that there are days that are challenging, and I still make mistakes, and I still have the same kind of human flaws around potential to fall into traps around negative thinking. And what I've learned about myself is that if I do a couple of things, and I've talked about this a lot on my own social media, but if I do a couple of things around my ground rules or non-negotiables that we hear about all the time now in the health and fitness industry, but if I stick to those, and if I speak to really positive people when I am having those slumps, it's really good for perspective. And I think what I've had is more of those days that I've had to think about, because I'm naturally a very positive, and I would consider myself resilient and strong in a lot of those. I don't suffer with mental health issues, but I have got a greater awareness of those things now.
Okay. And talk to me about the elite performance aspect of what you do. We've chatted to lots of guests over the last couple of weeks and months, but we haven't really gone down that elite route. How have they struggled over the course of the last while in terms of performance, in terms of staying on top of their game?
Well, the landscape is completely different, and athletes want to perform in front of people and crowds. That's where they get their buzz. It's even things like getting on a bus and going into a stadium and seeing people's faces, seeing people's energy and body language, and not having that hair on the back of the neck stuff when you're entering the arena. All of those type of things are very challenging, and there has been huge uncertainty from whether games will go ahead, whether there'll be the resources available to support them, not having the same amount of staff to support teams on game day, all those type of things. Like the landscape is completely different. So I suppose that's been the challenge. On the positive side, I have also been blown away by how incredible our management and our senior coaches have been at focusing on what's going on within people's control, and hearing the language of athletes just focusing on their basic tasks each day. It's been a brilliant reminder about how you can actually insulate yourself with positive things, and not allow yourself get sucked in to things that are very much outside of your control.
And from a body composition perspective, it has been hard for players. I know I've seen a few players earlier on at the start of the very first lockdown discussing the fact they couldn't train as much as normal, trying to keep the muscle mass on. That they've had challenges from that perspective. And I suppose nutrition's been crucial to kind of keeping them healthy all the way through.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things about particularly the first lockdown was the level of adherence and consistency and the physical shape that so many of the athletes got into. They are high performers for very good reason. And they used their skill set, their knowledge from a nutrition lifestyle, and from an exercise point of view, to actually get themselves into tremendous shape. So that was the first phase. So the big thing was to try and offset and manage injury, because most athletes, and we had some great conversations with athletes and people who worked in different sports, and the actual management of load was the biggest challenge, so that athletes weren't doing too much, so that they were burnt out when they did come back to competition. So nutrition was huge, but like the number one thing that athletes kept saying to me was how much joy and enjoyment that they were getting from cooking and the preparation of their own meals.
I think on a national level, that became and still is a really enjoyable task. People began to cook more, to appreciate food more, to get interested in food more, and recipes and stuff like that. And nationally, we have seen that both in social media and just generally, people are using cooking as a mindful, enjoyable task, and have really improved their cooking skills over the course of the last while.
They have. They have, and I've seen it through social media. I've seen it through my own family, and even WhatsApp group people sharing meals. I got some recipes sent to me this morning by a couple of athletes on WhatsApp, and it's great to see. And I know the world has changed an awful lot about what people show in their lives, but I really do think one of the positive things with social media is the sharing of meals and meal ideas, and the conversation has changed. And I may have mentioned this before, but some of my trips to Mediterranean regions and areas in Italy and the south of France, one of the things that amazed me in those experiences was the conversations around food. And I sort of felt that was absent in Ireland. We didn't have enough conversation, whether it be at the dinner table, or in the preparation, or even what are we going to make this week. And I think that we've started to talk about food a little bit more this particular last year.
Let's steer the conversation towards tips and tools, and giving our listeners tips around food. What are your go-to things, the things that you talk about all the time, the pillars from a nutritional perspective that you try to instill in people that you work with and people that you talk to on your social media accounts?
Well, it's all about it's all about what's realistic and what you can sustain within your practice. And I watch Operation Transformation, and I hear the messages that you give around, what are we going to do this week, and it's never really more than 3 key things. It could be looking at portion sizes, or it could be planning your meals, or it could be getting your steps, but they're very, very specific. And this is what we're doing this week. And it's exactly the same when you approach food, because it's so wide, it's so vast, and it's different for every individual. So the first thing I will always say is, and I will ask every client that I work with, what is the area within your nutrition that needs the most work? What's something that when you think about it off the top of your head, and I don't mean planning, or I don't mean preparation, or I don't mean cooking, like big things. I mean really specific things. Like, I know that on Wednesday, I have a very, very busy day because, I'm dropping the kids to school. I have meetings all day, and I miss lunch on Wednesday, or I miss lunch on Thursday. It's very specific. So if you had a meal ready for midday on Thursday this week, well, that would be an unbelievably positive and constructive thing to do. But I think it's that lack of foresight that a lot of people have within their lifestyle. And that is the first place that I start.
Okay, so it's very much planning. It's looking at your day, looking at your diary. It's looking back to go forward in terms of looking at where the issues are in relation to food. What do you always, mess up on when you try to get healthy? What are the mistakes that you always make? And then addressing each one of those mistakes as you can see them.
That's exactly it. That's really nicely summarized. And I think the first step in it is realizing, I call them pinch points. It can be whatever for each person. They can be your mini challenge, whatever it is. So it means that you need to know on Monday or Tuesday at the latest what you need to have in the fridge or the cupboards to prepare to have that meal ready. And then it's about putting one layer on top of another. It's planning is one thing, but it's like, well, then let's look at your variety of meals. Have you got plenty of variety? Are you choosing seasonal vegetables? Are you using or getting access to frozen vegetables and frozen fruits right now? Have you got your food set up at home in a way that is accessible? Have you got your dry ingredients? Have you got your spices? Have you got a process? And building a very simple process that is something that you can go to and repeat very effectively every evening is where you build success. And I don't mind saying that that's what I've learned, again, from high performance. And as a young practitioner, I was afraid of repetition, and I was afraid of talking about repetition because people's automatic response is always, well, I want something new. Can we do something new or a little bit more exciting? That's not where the progress comes from.
Okay, so it's very much having a couple of go-to recipes or go-to meals that inside out, they're healthy, you can make them without having to go to a book or anything like that. And, having the staple of your meals coming from those, and then adding a couple of kind of new things each week from there.
Yeah, again, I'm glad that you're pulling that out of what I'm saying. It's working well here, Karl. You're working with me. No, like that's exactly how you use resources. I actually said this in a team meeting with my own nutrition team earlier today. There's a girl that's come on board with us, and we have conversations every week. There's an awful lot of stuff going back and forth, but I actually commended her in the meeting because she has absorbed so much information and applied it herself and used her own initiative. And that's what we should do in life. We should, to achieve what we want to achieve, we use resources. So a cooking book or cookbook is a resource. Your book is something that you can use for tips and to plan your meals or to plan your exercise. Use a podcast to stay motivated and pick up new information. And then it's about the process of you applying the information on a daily and a weekly basis to achieve your goals.
What are the common mistakes that people make? And I love asking experts these questions because people are, that listen in can always associate with one or two of the issues or one or two of the mistakes that the experts bring up. So, people are trying to get healthy. They say, okay, I'm going to cook more. I'm going to get my food sorted out. What are the obvious mistakes people make in terms of, is a calorie restriction being too tight on calories? Is it dropping food groups because someone on social media told them to do it? Or, what are the obvious things that you're seeing?
Well, I'm going to take what I think is a big issue and maybe go a slightly different direction with it. And it's on something that you've just touched on about using social media. But this actually comes from this a brilliant video online of Razi Erasmus talking about the circle of performance, in the sense of all of the different parts or components that need to be right for you to be good at what you do. And he said, people who are really good at different things, whatever it might be, whether it be musicians or athletes or artists, they're good at all aspects. They get all aspects right. So going back to the pillars of performance that you mentioned, they get adequate sleep. They meet the recommendations for physical activity. They have a varied diet. They plan, they're organized. And these are the kind of the key things that people do, but they're all specific to them. They're really specific to them. And I had a great conversation with a guy just last week, and he's a very successful businessman. And the reason I was having the conversation with him was because we both know a mutual friend who is a high performing athlete. And he came to me and he said, "That's my vision. I want to be like this athlete." And I said, "Well, we're starting off the wrong basis, because that's not what your vision should be. You can use that person for inspiration, support, and guidance, but you are following your path. You are following your," and this is a very, very, very smart man. He's like, he actually stopped, and his mouth did open, and he said, "You know what? You're absolutely right. That makes sense." And it's not that it's about being realistic or unrealistic. It's about you reflecting on your pillars, your specific areas of improvement, and building your own personal plan to achieve your vision. And I see people doing this in all aspects of their life, whether it be in career, whether it be in sport, whether it be nutrition, whether it be in exercise. You're on your own path, achieve your own goals each day and each week.
Okay, and get to know your body and get to learn what works for you on an exercise level, on a sleep level, but also on a food level too. And for certain people, they will react differently to certain foods, or certain foods will work better for them in terms of time management or in terms of just taste and stuff like that. So it is making quite individual to you as opposed to a generic plan to follow.
Yeah, and like as an example, you could say, we could talk about restriction of food groups. We could have talked about high carb, low carb, too much protein. We could have talked about macro counting. We could have talked about fasting. We could have talked about the exclusion of dairy. We could have talked about people removing eggs for their diet, meat. We could have talked about anything. There's so many things where people fall into that trap. But what they're doing is they're looking in the wrong places. Like, this is what I'm seeing over and over. And the job of a good practitioner now is to keep people very focused on the resources and information that is relevant to them. And like, it's really interesting. Like, so much of the conversations I'm having with people, very, very small amount is now about nutrition. It's more about their mindset towards food.
Wow. You mentioned fasting there, and I'm intrigued about your opinion on it. I know my own opinion on it, but I'm intrigued to see what yours is, because it is still very trendy. Like, we see it in Q&As with corporate clients all the time. It comes up in the Q&A box at least 5, 6, 7 times. People are definitely aware of it, and it's probably one of the trendier things going at the moment. What's your take on it as you sit back in the chair ready to answer?
Well, I avoided the discussion and even sharing conversation or sharing information about fasting, because I felt like I was going to open a can of worms by talking about it and not giving enough context. So to make a long story short, I actually recorded a video with a very good friend of mine who is a researcher. And he had a far more in-depth knowledge around it, because he's carried out research in DCU himself about it, Dr. Brendan Egan. And we recorded a video on intermittent fasting that I've saved on my YouTube channel. I suppose to summarize it is that what it does is it constricts the opportunity to eat, which reduces the amount of calories that people consume. So it's incredibly simple. It's a very simple type of approach that people can take. I think, firstly, it's most often mentioned in the context of fat loss. That's one of the big things that it's mentioned in. The reason why it's successful is because it helps people create a calorie deficit. And very often people either skip breakfast or they're not eating junk food in the evening because they have to finish eating by 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever time period that's set. Some of the interesting stuff around it, and to be honest with you, I was quite biased against it as just a general recommendation, because if people need to have quite a good level of knowledge, understanding of nutrition, and have good general practice before they even use it. And I have found that a lot of people, it can damage their relationship with food, and they're searching again in the wrong place for answers. But having said that, there are people who use it very effectively, well-educated. I know a lot of doctors that use it to actually avoid the sweets on wards. It's a simple approach that they use, and they've found it as a good practice. But it's very, very context-based. It's very personal dependent. And it isn't the answer, that we're all looking for. But there are some caveats. And like there is some positive research around, particularly short-term studies that have looked at fat loss and improvement of insulin sensitivity. So the regulation of blood glucose and things like that. It's you can see, I've been talking already for probably about 2 or 3 minutes. It's a minefield.
Yeah, it's fascinating to ask, and it was something that I did want to ask you when you were coming on. Okay, let's lighten the mood a little bit. Spices. You love spices, and when I watch you cooking your meals on Instagram all the time, you've got spices going in left, right, and center. Talk us through some essentials that people should have in their kitchen that you're a fan of.
Okay, so I was rubbish, just absolutely rubbish with spices, and I realized it was because I never really paid attention to what I was doing. It was firing everything into the pan and hopefully it'll work out. So the way that I actually, again, it's really simple stuff, but if you have a process around your cooking, whether it be a little bit of onion, garlic, olive oil, and salt as a base, that's a wonderful way to flavor your meat, for example, or your vegetables as a starting point. Then it's about, I just use very accessible spices, chili, cumin, paprika, and turmeric is probably one of my favorites. And I will add them one at a time. So the spice will go in, you will mix it around and get a sense then, do you like this flavor? Do you like this spice? Would you go for a slightly different variation? Like, let's say, for example, I love cumin, but I prefer the seeds to the powder and things like that. And finding, again, what meats it works well with. I find it works really well with chicken and beef, but it's obviously not going to work that well with fish. So, you learn these things the hard way. My simple advice is that spices are brilliant from a nutrition point of view. They've got really good phytochemicals, antioxidants, and compounds in them. We should learn to use spices effectively. Start with one or two, become familiar with them, and then try something else. And some of the blends are actually fantastic. There's new blends out there with a mix of paprika, salt, basil, oregano, and things like that, and they're great. Did that answer your question?
It excites you. Even your body language watching you answer that question, you got all excited when I brought spices up and you're getting kind of enthused. And it is that, right? So it's trial and error. It's trying to add these things into your diet, find what works for you, and go with the stuff that you enjoy.
Well, I think it excites me because I only, if people only saw me in the kitchen when the camera's not on, I will be dancing around the kitchen. I'm as daft as a goose, and I love that. That's why I'm animated, because it's a really positive experience, and I love the process of bringing food to life.
Final question is all around balance, which is something I think people often miss when they try to be healthy or get healthy or lose weight or whatever it may be. But balance is probably a key area that they forget about. And for long-term health, it's something that needs to be there.
Oh, I think the word balanced person, balanced diet, the most commonly used word in the nutrition health business or industry, without enough context. And I think people need to, I know all of my answers seem, there seems to be an awful lot of layers to them, but I think people need to know what balance means. I've found what my balance is, but it took me 10 years. I like my example of balance is that last week I drank 2 bottles of wine, and I ate 3 bars of dark chocolate, and I realized that I couldn't do that this week. I needed to balance things up a bit. And that's me going, okay, well, hold on a second. You're kind of taking the piss here. I know you enjoyed your few glasses of wine, and it was great and it was very enjoyable, and it made my cooking even more fun. But you can't do that all the time. And there's a reason why there's very strong recommendations around alcohol. My sleep was all over the place. It affected my digestion, affected how I was feeling. I wasn't as energetic. And I think that goes back to exactly what we said about the reflection piece. It's about knowing when you're at your high performing best. And it's knowing that doing that, and even having those couple of extra glasses of red wine, it was what I needed at the time, but too much of it will tip you over into a space that is unhealthy or damaging.
Yeah, that's pretty much the idea of balance I was going at with that question, which is, that every week is different, every day is different, but trying to adhere to a really strict diet where there's no alcohol for a period of time or no chocolate for a period of time or whatever. And it might be different if you're a prize fighter trying to get to a certain weight for a fight. That's an exceptional circumstance. But for most people listening in, if you're trying to be healthy, there is space for a bit of alcohol in a healthy approach to life. There is space for a little bit of chocolate to a healthy approach to life, but it is balancing it out and being aware of that.
Well, I think I'd like to add one very, very critical other point, and that is that I didn't feel any guilt, none. There's no guilt associated with any of those decisions, but I am proactive about how I build in that balance. And I think what's destructive in people's behavior is where they make those decisions and they compound them with another bad decision, and they put another bad week with that last week, and they don't bring that corrective action in. And that's where the issues are. So you really do need to work hard. And I personally, that was my biggest challenge through food, was to not feel like I needed to punish myself every time I did treat myself.
Every time we chat, this is the third time that we've chatted, our conversations grow deeper and more mature and more reflective. And I think it's great because it shows that, that experts, they grow, and as they get older and life kind of goes on a little bit, you do gain a slightly different impression of your area of expertise. And that maturity, I think, is really, really important. It's been great to catch up, as always. Tell me about, you've a new online program. I know that over the course of the last year or so, you've really developed that. Where can people find the website?
Yeah, and I suppose just to say that happens as well when you're talking to somebody who you're on the same page with and who can finish your answers for you. You're in a good place when I ravel for 3 minutes and you summarize them for people who have completely logged off. So thanks very genuinely for having me on. I love chatting with about all of these different things. Yeah. So over the past year, I've been building the Davey Nutrition website, and the idea is to give people the resources that we've been talking about. It's articles on all of these topics. It's recipes, meal ideas, nutrition information, and it's meal plans as a reference, not meal plans that you have to strictly adhere to. It's, using these things as a way to build your knowledge. And like I said, those days in the week where you need to be organized, that's the idea of it.
Cool. And give us the website again and your Instagram handle as well. Don't forget that.
So Instagram is at Davey Nutrition, and my website is www.daveynutrition.com.
Daniel, Davey, it's been great to catch up, and we'll catch up in person whenever the restrictions lift, I'm sure. But listen, thank you so much for joining us on today's show, folks. I really hope you enjoyed that. Daniel Davey is one of the experts in his area, and as you can hear in his voice, he's incredibly passionate about what he talks about. As ever, we are back next week with more Real Health. If you enjoyed the show, and hopefully you did, don't forget to rate and review, and we'll see you next week for more Real Health. So long, Gafo.
Leia Healthcare, looking after you always. Proud sponsors of Real Health with Karl Henry.